So really, one of the things that we're keying in on is what you're secretive about, what you're transparent about, and why one way or another. So, and there are some things that I've gotten into dialogue with DMs, and it's interesting the line of reasoning. So, for example, like there's a DM I'm playing with, and like he feels bad if we discover a creature's modifier. So like if for whatever reason it's like we know this ogre has a +6 to his attack bonus. It's like, well, as players you shouldn't really know that. And it's like, first of all, what harm does it do? If we know it's got a +6 attack bonus, there's nothing we can do with that. You know, it's not like we can change that. Now, if, for example, we know that this creature has a +6, but this other creature has a +9, we might prioritize one over the other. But also, ideally, that should be being conveyed by the story already, you know? So there's nothing I find from a gameplay, like, systems perspective that a player could understand informationally that should not also be conveyed in kind of a narrative sense. Your job as a skillful DM, the mechanics and the narrative all fall under the same roof of gameplay, and no matter how a player interprets it, their decisions should still be the same. If they make a different decision based on your narrative description versus if you replay that same thing and you give them a gameplay description and they choose another thing, it means that there's a misalignment between those two things. And ideally, when you're running a game, there should be a harmony between the gameplay mechanics and the narrative. That's why the game is designed like this, you know? And whenever you have that dissonance, now that's something to kind of pay attention to as well. And there was even things like the latest session of Garrus I ran, I started doing something, and I don't know why I wasn't doing this before, but whenever a player dealt one of my creatures damage, I would just type, like, onto the map, kind of like we were saying, drawing onto the map, Adam, how much damage that creature had taken. So rather than being like, what does it look like? It was like, that was something where, as a player, theoretically, if a player was keeping absolute track of everything going on, they would know how much damage each creature on the board had taken. So why go through a whole hubbubaloo of being like, well, this guy has 1 bruise and this guy looks more cut up, and or being like, you know, this one has taken 32 damage, and when you can just visually put it on there, using more senses than just focusing on the audible, that all of a sudden created a much more relaxed environment, and the players were able to make clearer, faster decisions, which then sped up the game and made it more fun, because now we weren't wasting energy on unnecessary details.
There's a lot that can be said for presenting information, as long as you know what you're looking at, and how that removes resistance to play in whatever system you're in. When I teach guitar, there is a tool that is utilized. It's often referred to as a chord window, and it is a picture of the guitar fretboard. The line, it's just a set of like lines going down and lines across, but the lines going down are the strings, the lines across are metal separators, and the spaces between those are frets. And then you put little dots on specific strings in specific frets, like a grid of what you press down to perform certain chords. Now, that description and seeing that information, for people that are not learning guitar, that can be a very confusing thing. For everyone who learns guitar, they just, that I understand what that looks like, and I understand what the symbols are telling me, and what it's supposed to convey. Now I can play this song. It's that chord, then that chord, then that chord, then that chord. And I practice it a few times, I've got it. In a game, Roll20 has a wonderful opportunity to relay bits of information that are not necessary to be conveyed narratively at all times. So if you can remove how many, like maybe not how many hit points specifically, but hey, how hurt is this guy? Because I always try to display, if we're fighting something, a little energy bar over them. Not displaying the numbers, but displaying the energy bar, so that they can see knocked down. Oh, he's so close, he's in the red or something. That communicates the gameplay that this thing is hurt. And in so doing that, that also removes my need to describe everything. I might still describe, but we kind of hit it from both ends. And if you miss the description, you can still see the visualization that this thing's hurt. It's a great way to hit folks that learn in all these different ways and have different motes of attention, like different wells of attention for different things. Also, it's a great way to show the game state, the HUD, if you will. And we've said it before that even though you can reveal a game state, it doesn't mean that you can't express yourself in a narrative space either. They're not separate. They're together. They're synergistic. So if you understand all those little things, this thing's AC or my hit points. How well am I doing? Oh boy, my energy's at half. Theirs is at a quarter. Does that then free you up? You don't have to track those things anymore. And that frees you to express yourself in more like social or explorative ways. It frees you up to express yourself in the other pillars of play now that the other things are sort of automated in a way. I like presenting that information so that it removes resistance for the players.
Yeah, and another thing, because you had mentioned, speaking to or really teaching to, if we were really to boil it back down, multiple intelligences, some people, if you present visual information, are going to pick it up faster than listening to it. Or, as I've found over and over again, you never know when the freaking internet's going to cut out or somebody's going to stutter and you're trying to reconnect and get them to hear. Whereas if it's all typed out, even if they lose their internet connection and have to disconnect and reconnect, they can just go back. It undercuts all of the issues that could come up playing in this kind of environment. Even things like I found music, more so than even at the table, music accompanied by certain visuals and artwork really help demonstrate a certain kind of world and a certain tone for what you want your gameplay to be like. So I found that, when I was running my latest games, if I've got really soft jazz music, my players react very differently than even if I have music that's just a little bit faster, or there's a different instrument that's playing, So it's really interesting. The decisions they make in combat, depending on what kind of combat music you play. If it's sillier combat music, they tend to make decisions a little bit differently than if the combat music is a little more serious. So I really find that one of the things that this forced us to do was examine how the setup of our games, the tools that we use, can help us quickly get the players into the mindset and the experience that we want them to have. If you don't want your players stressed out and tense, don't have stressful, tense music. If you want them to get into more of an old-timey medieval mood, play a little Skyrim. If you want them to feel a little more modern, play something a little more modern, So there, a lot of times, I find that I am instantly connected to the world just by whatever kind of soundtrack the DM has elected to use in a certain way. And that's also going to affect the tone of how I kind of choose to RP as well.
Thank you so much for listening to some of our podcast highlights. This podcast is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. If you want to support the content creators, feel free to visit our Patreon. And please, game responsibly.